There's a moment in every person's life where a single choice reshapes everything that comes after it. For Jamie Davis, that moment came not on a treacherous mountain highway covered in black ice, but in a quiet conversation in Hope, British Columbia, when a television producer asked him to open his business to a camera crew. He almost said no, and if he had, nobody outside of British Columbia would know his name today. This is the story of how a man who grew up riding in a tow truck with his father built one of the most recognized heavy rescue operations in North America, and then made a decision that sent his company's reputation to every corner of the world. Jamie Davis didn't stumble into the towing industry. He was born into it. Growing up in Vancouver, British Columbia in the 1960s, his father introduced him to tow trucks before he was old enough to drive one. While most kids his age were playing pickup sports after school, Jamie was learning how to handle a winch, read road conditions, and keep a rig from sliding off a mountain shoulder in the middle of winter. By the time he was 15 years old, he was already working at Aldergrove Towing, getting his hands dirty doing the kind of work most adults wouldn't go near. There was no glamour in it, no applause, just cold mornings, busted equipment, and vehicles that didn't want to be moved. He didn't just tolerate that reality, he thrived in it. That environment shaped exactly the kind of operator he would later become. As he built his skills across the province, he eventually made his way to Hope, British Columbia, a small town nestled in the mountains at the southern end of the Coquihalla Highway. For most people, Hope is a pit stop. For commercial truckers, it's the gateway to some of the most demanding road conditions in all of North America. The Coquihalla, locals call it the Cock, climbs through mountain passes where weather can change in minutes, where a semi loaded with lumber can be moving fine one moment and sliding off the road the next. Jamie recognized immediately that this was where the real work was. He founded Jamie Davis Motor Truck and Auto, building the company wrecker by wrecker, job by job. When other operators wouldn't touch a recovery because it was too dangerous or too complicated, Jamie's crew showed up. He built a reputation not because he marketed himself, but because he kept delivering in conditions that broke lesser operators. By 2010, he was one of the most respected heavy rescue operators in the region. What he didn't have yet was any kind of public profile beyond the mountain corridors he worked. That was about to change, and it started with a broken-down moving truck. In the summer of 2010, a man named Neil Thomas found himself stranded on Highway 5 after his moving truck broke down. One of Jamie's heavy rescue operators was dispatched to the scene. While waiting for the situation to be sorted, Thomas struck up a conversation with the driver, who started talking about the kinds of recoveries the company had pulled off over the years. 18-wheelers teetering on cliff edges, tankers jackknifed across multiple lanes in whiteout conditions, recoveries that took days and heavy equipment most people have never seen up close. Thomas was a television producer, and what he was hearing had all the ingredients of a compelling series. Not manufactured drama or contrived conflict, just real people doing genuinely dangerous and technically extraordinary work. He couldn't stop thinking about it. By the winter of 2011, he had brought in executive producer Mark Miller and cameraman Kevin Mills. The three of them drove out to Hope and sat down with Jamie Davis at his yard. The timing was not accidental. The winter of 2010 to 2011 had been one of the most brutal and relentless the region had seen in years. Jamie's company had been running at full tilt, responding to wrecks almost around the clock during peak conditions. It was exactly the kind of season that made the pitch feel urgent, because the material was already there, unfolding in real time. What happened in that meeting would determine whether any of it ever reached an audience. Jamie Davis did not jump at the opportunity. That detail matters, because it explains everything about why the show worked the way it did. His hesitation was not about ego or reluctance to be on television. It came from somewhere more grounded than that. The towing and heavy rescue industry had a rough public image. People who needed a tow truck rarely thought of it as a skilled profession. The industry was associated with roadside scams, overcharging, and profiteering from people at their worst moments. Jamie had spent decades fighting against that perception in his own work, and the last thing he wanted was a television crew turning his operation into something sensationalized or cheap. He was concerned, in plain terms, that a camera crew would show up and turn life-or-death recoveries into entertainment fodder, missing the point entirely about what the work actually meant. His crews put themselves in real danger every single time they rolled out on a highway. Drivers had to deal with vehicles racing past them at speed while they worked in sub-zero temperatures, sometimes in the dark, sometimes on ice. Getting that wrong on television would have been worse than not doing it at all. He agreed to participate only after receiving assurances directly from the production team that the series would be documentary in nature, that it would focus on the genuine risks, the real teamwork, and the actual stakes involved. No manufactured drama, no staged confrontations. The camera would follow what was already happening, and the work itself would be the story. There's one more detail from the development of the show that most fans have never heard. When it came time to name the series, it wasn't the production company or the network executives who came up with the title. According to a disclosure from the official Jamie Davis Towing Facebook page years after the show launched, it was Jamie's own team in Hope that came up with the name Highway Through Hell. The people who actually drove that highway every winter were the ones who understood what it deserved to be called. Highway Through Hell premiered on Discovery Channel Canada on September 4, 2012. Nobody was quite prepared for what happened next. The debut episode drew 1.7 million total viewers and became the highest-rated series premiere in the history of Discovery Channel Canada at that point. For context, this was a show about a towing company in a small town in British Columbia, built around documentary footage of truck recoveries in bad weather. There was no celebrity cast, no scripted storyline, and no manufactured conflict. It was just Jamie, his crew, the Coquihalla, and a camera pointed at the truth. What it tapped into was something the television landscape had been underestimating for years: a massive audience of viewers who were hungry for content about real tradespeople doing skilled, dangerous work without pretense. Truckers recognized themselves in the show. Families in rural communities saw their realities reflected. People who had never touched a wrecker in their lives found themselves completely absorbed by a 75-ton rotator being guided down an icy pass at midnight. By the 2014 to 2015 broadcast year, Highway Through Hell had become Discovery Canada's single most watched program overall. The Season 5 finale in December 2016 drew 886,000 viewers, the most watched broadcast on Canadian entertainment specialty television for that entire year. The show was no longer just a hit, it was a cultural fixture. Jamie Davis had gone from a regional operator most people outside of BC had never heard of to the most recognizable figure in the Canadian towing industry. And the camera was still rolling. The numbers in Canada were remarkable enough on their own. But what happened internationally is what turns this from a success story into something genuinely extraordinary. Highway Through Hell was broadcast in more than 170 countries and territories worldwide. The show aired across the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, and throughout Europe and beyond, available in over a dozen languages. At a certain point, it found a second wave of global reach through Netflix, introducing it to entirely new audiences who had no prior connection to Canadian television or to the Coquihalla Highway. The ripple effects landed directly in Hope, British Columbia. A town of roughly 6,000 people suddenly had visitors driving in specifically because of the show, fans who wanted to see the yard, meet the crew, and get a sense of the landscape that had become so familiar on their screens. Local businesses felt it. The town's profile shifted. A community that had largely existed in the margins of Canadian geography became, for a certain subset of viewers worldwide, a destination. Jamie Davis himself committed serious personal time to that connection with fans. He has signed autographs and taken photographs with supporters at no charge on countless occasions, something he has spoken about as coming from genuine appreciation rather than obligation. The show hadn't just given his company exposure. It had made his crew into something people cared about, and he took that seriously. The success of Highway Through Hell also spawned a direct spin-off. Heavy Rescue 401, following recovery crews on Ontario's Highway 401, debuted in January 2017 and immediately broke the record that Highway Through Hell had set 5 years earlier, becoming the most watched premiere in Discovery Canada's history at that point. One show had not only built a franchise, it had reshaped what Canadian factual television could achieve. Here is where the story takes a turn that most viewers never fully understood while watching it unfold on screen. The very thing that had made Highway Through Hell so compelling, the relentless, unforgiving nature of the Coquihalla, began to change. Safety enforcement on Canadian highways improved significantly. Better driver training, stricter regulations, improved equipment standards, and increased awareness all combined to push accident rates down. According to a Truck West feature that examined Jamie's business in 2016, incidents on the Coquihalla had dropped by 36% from the show's early days. The practical consequence of that shift was direct and financial. During the first seasons of Highway Through Hell, Jamie's crew was responding to major recoveries almost every 12 hours during winter months. By 2016, that number had dropped to just 4 or 5 heavy recovery calls in an entire season. In heavy recovery, the dramatic, technically intense work the show was built around was always the most expensive part of the operation to run. The overhead on a 75-ton rotator is not insignificant, and as Jamie explained publicly at the time, the revenue from those jobs was often barely enough to cover costs. The big machines made for great television. They didn't always make for a sustainable business model. Jamie pivoted. The company shifted increasingly toward long-haul towing, including cross-border runs into the United States. It wasn't as visually dramatic as pulling an overturned semi off a canyon ledge, but it was consistent, reliable work that could keep the operation running while the camera crew continued to document what was still happening on the highway. The business reinvented itself in real time, with an audience watching. There was also a less discussed consequence of the show's visibility. Some companies that experienced wrecks began declining to call Jamie's crew specifically because they didn't want their incident documented on television. The fame that had made the company globally recognizable was, in certain situations, costing them work. What doesn't often get discussed about Highway Thru Hell is how much the show cost the people in it. Not in a figurative sense, but in genuine, documented ways. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a significant and ongoing issue within the heavy rescue and towing industry. Jamie Davis has spoken openly about this reality. His drivers routinely encounter fatal accidents, severe injuries, and scenes that would affect any person regardless of professional training. They work inches from speeding traffic in the dark, in the cold, with thousands of pounds of unstable machinery around them. The cumulative weight of those experiences doesn't just disappear because the camera is pointed elsewhere. The show itself addressed PTSD directly in its third season, acknowledging that the psychological toll on these operators mirrors what law enforcement, firefighters, and paramedics deal with. Some of Jamie's drivers worked through it with counseling and continued. Others could not and moved on. That dimension of the operation is as real as any recovery shown on screen. Season 12 brought a cascade of material catastrophes. The famous rotator, the flagship piece of heavy equipment that had become almost as recognizable as Jamie himself, was run off the road and badly damaged. Another major truck in the fleet was totaled in a rollover. A third was destroyed in a brake fire while hauling on a downhill grade. The financial pressure of replacing that equipment while keeping the operation running forced difficult decisions, including selling off parts of the fleet to cover costs. COVID-19 had already compressed revenues during the 2 seasons prior, and the insurance and replacement costs from that cluster of losses hit at the worst possible time. Then, in January of 2023, it was Jamie himself who ended up on the wrong side of a highway incident. On January 8th, he was involved in a multi-vehicle collision on Highway 5 near Avola, British Columbia, while working a long-haul run. The production crew was not present. Fortunately, no one was seriously injured, and Jamie expressed genuine gratitude to the emergency responders and to the fans who reached out afterward. But for a man who had built his reputation on getting other people out of exactly that kind of situation, it was a sobering moment and a reminder that the Coquihalla doesn't make exceptions for anyone, regardless of how long they've been working it. When Jamie Davis agreed to let that camera crew into his yard in the winter of 2011, he was not thinking about global distribution deals or franchise spin-offs or fans flying into hope from Europe. He was thinking about his industry's reputation and whether a television show could change how the public understood what towing and heavy rescue actually meant. By every measure, that goal was achieved. 13 seasons, more than 190 episodes, broadcast in more than 170 countries, available across Discovery Channel Canada, the Weather Channel, Netflix, and beyond. A spin-off series that broke the very record Highway Thru Hell had set. A small town in British Columbia that became internationally recognized. A towing industry whose public perception shifted in real and documented ways because a documentary showed people what the work actually looked like. But the more interesting part of this story isn't the scale of what the show became. It's how close the whole thing came to not happening at all. Jamie Davis almost said no. He had every practical reason to be cautious. He had spent years building a reputation on his own terms, in an industry that the public didn't respect, and the risk of handing that reputation to a television crew was not trivial. He bet on authenticity. He made the production team commit to showing the real thing, not a version of it. He had his own people come up with the name. And then he went back to work on the Coquihalla and let the footage speak for itself. That, more than any individual recovery or any particular season, is the decision that made the difference. Not a business pivot or a branding strategy, just a towing operator from Hope, British Columbia, deciding that the truth about what he did was worth showing to the world. It turns out he was right.